The storm had taken everything but her books. Gwyneth Lockhart stood at the edge of Derwentwater, her boots sinking into October mud, and watched men drag sodden crates from the lake's steel-grey depths. Water streamed from broken wood. Inside one crate, she glimpsed the corner of a leather binding, swollen beyond recognition. 3 years of research, 15 ancient maps collected from Constantinople to Cairo. Her entire inheritance from her father, spent on a collection that now bled ink into the brackish water of a Cumberland lake. "Miss!" The boatman's voice carried across the shingle. "That's the last of it. The rest went down too deep." Her throat constricted. She managed a nod, though the man had already turned away, his shoulders bent against wind that smelled of rain and rotting leaves. Above, the fells rose like the backs of sleeping giants, their peaks lost in mist. This landscape, all crags and water and impossible distances, felt designed to swallow things. Ships, books, women who didn't know their place. "You'll catch your death!" The voice came from behind her, rough as the stones beneath her feet. Gwyneth turned. The man stood perhaps 10 yards distant, as if proximity itself might compromise something. He wore a greatcoat that had seen better years, its hem thick with mud. His face was weathered in a way that spoke of more than age, as if wind and sun had tried to scour something out of him and only partially succeeded. Dark hair fell across his forehead, overlong and carelessly tucked behind one ear. His eyes, she noticed with the automatic cataloguing instinct that had served her through years of studying ancient texts, were the grey blue of deep water. "I've caught worse," she said. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "The coach from Penrith overturned 3 miles back. They said a woman insisted on transferring her luggage to a rowboat despite the weather." He paused. "They said she was mad." "They're not entirely wrong." This time he did smile, brief as lightning. "I'm Rothwell. The house is mine, what remains of it." He gestured vaguely toward the fell. Through the mist, Gwyneth could just make out the dark bulk of a manor house, its windows like closed eyes. "Your letter said you required lodging while searching for a property to lease. My factor mentioned your situation." The delicate pause before situation told her everything. She was a woman alone, travelling without companion or husband, carrying boxes of books instead of respectable luggage. In 1862, this made her either a lunatic or a bluestocking, both equally scandalous. "My situation," Gwyneth said carefully, "is that I need a dry place to work and enough peace to complete my manuscript before winter. Your factor said Rothwell Manor had empty rooms. It has 37 empty rooms." His voice carried something bitter beneath the words. "Take your pick." He turned and began walking up the steep path toward the house. After a moment's hesitation, Gwyneth followed. Her skirts grew heavy with mud and lake water, each step an effort. The man, Baron Rothwell, she reminded herself, though he wore his title like an ill-fitting coat, didn't look back to see if she followed. His gait was uneven, she noticed, a limp, subtle but distinct, favouring his left leg. The path twisted through bracken and exposed stone. Her lungs burned. London had not prepared her for this vertical world where sheep clung to impossible angles and the sky pressed down like a physical weight. "You're wondering about the leg?" He spoke without turning. "Crimea. Minniball shattered the knee. The surgeons wanted to take it off, but I was drunk enough to fight them and lucky enough to survive the infection." Gwyneth's breath came short. "I wasn't—" "Everyone wonders. Better to address it plainly." He stopped at a bend in the path. Below them, the lake spread like hammered pewter. The overturned boat was a dark smudge against the shore. "You lost everything?" "Everything that mattered." "Then we have that in common." He resumed walking. Gwyneth stared at his retreating back, at the way his shoulders held themselves rigid, as if bracing against a blow that never quite landed. What had he lost? The war, clearly. Perhaps family. The house seemed too large for one man. Money, possibly, though the manor itself suggested old wealth even if the grounds showed neglect. They crested the rise. Rothwell Manor stood before them, Elizabethan bones with Georgian additions, slate roof gleaming wet, surrounded by gardens gone half wild. Rhododendrons sprawled unpruned. Gravel drives disappeared into weeds. But the proportions were good, and the setting, backed against the fell, overlooking the lake, struck something in Gwyneth's chest. Her father would have loved this. He would have sat on that terrace with his surveying instruments, measuring distances, mapping the invisible lines that connected water to stone to sky. "The east wing is intact," Rothwell said, pushing open the front door. It swung on oiled hinges despite the house's general air of abandonment. "Mrs. Penrose keeps 3 rooms clean. You can have your choice." Inside smelled of beeswax and damp stone, and something else. Old smoke, perhaps. The entrance hall soared 2 stories, dark wood panelling swallowing what little light came through narrow windows. A staircase curved upward into shadow. Gwyneth's footsteps echoed. "I can't pay much," she said. "Not until my publisher sends the advance. If he sends it." "Your letter mentioned a book. On what subject?" "Cartography. Specifically, how medieval maps encoded religious and political power through geographic distortion." She waited for his eyes to glaze. Men's eyes always did when she discussed her work. Even her father, who taught her to read Arabic and use a sextant, had sometimes looked pained when she launched into theoretical discussions. But Rothwell's expression sharpened. "You're arguing maps are propaganda." "I'm arguing they've always been propaganda. Mappa Mundi placed Jerusalem at the world's center, not because of geographic accuracy, but theological necessity. The Hereford map literally depicts paradise as a physical location you could reach by traveling east. These aren't errors, they're deliberate choices about which truths matter." "Which truths matter," he repeated slowly. "Yes, I've known officers who drew maps that showed favorable terrain where none existed. Men died following those maps into swamps and box canyons." His jaw tightened. Geography as wishful thinking. Gwyneth felt something slot into place, like the satisfying click of a compass closing. Exactly. They stood in the dim hallway, rainwater pooling at their feet, and for a moment the house held its breath around them. "You'll share my bed until your husband arrives," Rothwell said abruptly. Gwyneth's heart stopped. "I beg your pardon?" Colour rose in his face, the first sign of discomfort he'd shown. "Christ, no, I meant—" He ran a hand through his hair, scattering water. "The only heated room is the library. My bedroom connects to it. You can work there during the day, sleep in one of the East Wing rooms at night. I meant you'd share the space, not—" He broke off. I should stop talking. Despite everything, the shipwreck, the lost books, the impossible manuscript deadline, this strange, ruined house and its stranger owner, Gwyneth felt laughter bubble up. It escaped as a half-hysterical giggle that echoed off the panelling. Rothwell stared at her as if she'd begun speaking in tongues. "I'm sorry," she gasped. "It's only, you looked so horrified." "I was propositioning a drowned scholar in my entrance hall. Horrified seems appropriate." "You were offering workspace to said drowned scholar. There's a distinction." Apparently not a clear one. But his mouth softened. "Come, I'll show you the library. Fair warning, it's excessive." He led her through a warren of corridors, their footsteps muffled by threadbare carpet. They passed closed doors, shrouded furniture, portraits whose subjects watched with flat Tudor eyes. The house felt held in suspension, as if waiting for something, or someone, to wake it. Then Rothwell opened a door, and Gwyneth forgot to breathe. The library occupied what must have been a great hall originally, 30 feet high, with hammer beam ceiling and a gallery running the upper perimeter. Every wall was books. Floor to ceiling, leather spines ranging from cracked black to vibrant gilt, organized, she could tell at a glance, by some idiosyncratic system that wasn't quite alphabetical, but wasn't random either. A massive fireplace dominated one end, already laid with wood. Windows along the south wall looked out at the lake, now barely visible through rain that fell in grey sheets. In the centre stood a desk of carved oak large enough to sleep on, its surface empty except for a single leather-bound journal, closed. "Excessive," Gwyneth breathed, "is an understatement." "My grandfather collected. My father added, I... Rothwell moved to the fireplace and began kindling the fire. I mostly hide here. From what? The flames caught, orange light licking across his features. He didn't answer immediately, just watched the fire build. When he spoke, his voice was so low she almost missed it. From the world, from myself, from memories that won't stay buried. He straightened. Mrs. Penrose will bring dinner at 8. If you need anything, I'm usually here, or walking the fells, or trying not to drink. This last was delivered with such matter-of-fact bleakness that Gwyneth didn't know how to respond. He crossed to the door, his limp more pronounced now. The climb must have pained him. He paused at the threshold. Your husband, when does he arrive? The question landed like a stone in still water. Never, Gwyneth said. There is no husband. Rothwell's hand tightened on the doorframe. The letter was written by my publisher's secretary, who assumed a woman traveling alone must have a husband joining her later. I didn't correct the assumption. It's easier that way. Easier than what? Than explaining I'm 28, unmarried by choice, and intend to remain so. That I spent my inheritance on maps instead of a trousseau. That my father trained me as a scholar, and I have no intention of wasting that training by becoming someone's wife. The words came out sharper than intended. If that's a problem, I'll find lodging elsewhere. The rain hammered against the windows. The fire crackled. Rothwell studied her with an intensity that made her skin feel too tight. No problem, he said finally. Just truth instead of a comforting lie. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. I prefer those, generally. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Gwyneth stood alone in the enormous library, surrounded by thousands of books, and felt the strangest sensation, like a compass needle swinging toward true north after years of deviation. Outside, the storm swallowed the fells. Inside, the fire burned. And somewhere in the house's depths, she heard footsteps. Rothwell's uneven gait, pacing back and forth, like a man trying to walk away from something that followed him regardless. She moved to the desk and opened her satchel, one of the few things that had survived the wreck, leather oiled against water. Inside were her notebooks, her father's surveying compass, and a letter from her publisher that she'd read so many times the paper had grown soft as cloth. Miss Lockhart, your proposal is intriguing but requires substantial evidence. Without the maps you claim to possess, I cannot justify the advance. Deliver a complete manuscript with proper citations by December, or I must withdraw the offer. The reading public has little appetite for theoretical geography from a female author. Do not give them reason to doubt your scholarship. December, 8 weeks away, and all her evidence lying at the bottom of Derwentwater. Gwyneth sank into the chair and pressed her palms against her eyes. The impossibility of it threatened to crush her. She needed those maps, needed to photograph them, trace the distortions, cross-reference with historical texts to prove her thesis. Without them, she had nothing but theory, and theory from a woman's pen was worth less than the paper it was written on. A sound made her look up. Rothwell stood in the doorway she hadn't heard open, holding a decanter of amber liquid and 2 glasses. Whiskey, he said. From before I swore off it. I thought you might need it more than I need sobriety tonight. I thought you said you were trying not to drink. I said I was trying. I didn't promise success. He set the glasses on the desk and poured with a steady hand. To shipwrecks, he said, raising his glass. May we survive them. Gwyneth lifted hers. The whiskey burned going down, smoky and sweet. She coughed. Not a drinking woman, I take it. Not generally, no. Good. The world has enough drunks. He set his glass down, still full. But I find the ritual comforting even when I don't indulge, a reminder that choice still exists. Choice about what? Whether to drown oneself slowly or build something instead. He glanced at her notebooks. What will you do? About the manuscript, Gwyneth told him. About her father, the renowned cartographer who'd trained her from childhood. About his death 3 years ago, leaving her enough money to either marry respectably or pursue the research he'd begun. About the maps, Ottoman, Crusader era, Byzantine, each one a window into how power shaped perception. About the publisher who'd grudgingly offered a contract, then loaded it with impossible conditions. "So you need the maps," Rothwell said when she finished. "They're gone, at the bottom of a lake." "Not gone, submerged. There's a difference." He crossed to a cabinet and withdrew a leather case, which he opened to reveal a collection of diving apparatus, brass helmets, India rubber suits. "My grandfather used these to explore the lake bed. Looking for Roman artifacts," he claimed, though I suspect he simply enjoyed the excuse to play underwater explorer. Gwyneth's pulse quickened. "You think they could be recovered?" "The lake's deepest point is only 70 feet. In calm weather, with proper equipment and someone who knows the currents." He shrugged. "It's possible." "Do you know someone?" His smile was crooked. "I know the currents, and I know how to operate the equipment. What I don't know is why I'm offering to risk my neck fishing for your drowned books." "Then why are you?" Rothwell was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. Finally, "Because you spoke about truth mattering. And I've spent 2 years since Sevastopol learning that lies, even comfortable ones, eventually suffocate you." He met her eyes. "Your maps matter. If I can help you prove that, perhaps it's worth risking more than my neck." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said quietly, "that I haven't cared about anything in a very long time. It's easier that way. Safer. But also," he trailed off, searching for words, "empty. Your shipwreck reminded me that some things are worth salvaging, even if they're damaged, even if the effort costs you." The fire popped. Rain streaked the windows. Between them, the unstated thing hung in the air. They were both shipwrecked in their own ways, both trying to salvage what remained. "When can we dive?" Gwyneth asked. "Not we. Me. Diving is dangerous work. I've been diving. My father taught me in Egypt in the Red Sea. We recovered artifacts from a Ptolemaic wreck." At his skeptical look, she added, "I know it's unconventional. Most things about my education were." "Most things about you seem to be," Rothwell said, but his tone held admiration rather than censure. "Very well. Tomorrow, if the storm clears, we'll need calm water and good light." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Miss Lockhart, thank you." "For what?" "For being precisely as strange as advertised. It's refreshing." Then he was gone, leaving Gwyneth alone with the whiskey and the books, and the slowly dawning realization that she'd found something in this isolated house that she hadn't known she was looking for. Someone who understood that truth, in maps, in memory, in one's own broken places, was worth more than comfort. She returned to her notebooks, but her mind kept drifting to the man beyond the door, to his limp, his careful distance, his admission about drinking, to the way he'd looked at her maps with the eye of someone who understood that geography was never just about places. It was about power and truth, and the stories we told ourselves about where we belonged. Outside, the storm began to ease. By morning, she thought, the lake might be calm enough. They would descend into cold water and search for lost things. The metaphor wasn't lost on her. Gwyneth pulled her father's compass from her bag and set it on the desk. The needle swung and steadied, pointing north. Always north, unwavering. She wondered what direction she was heading now, and whether the man in the next room might be the compass that helped her find it. The lake at dawn was a mirror. Gwyneth stood on Rothwell's private dock, watching mist rise from water so still it reflected the fells with perfect fidelity. The world seemed doubled, uncertain which version was real. Cold bit through her wool coat. November had arrived overnight, bringing with it the bone-deep chill of northern England, where winter came early and stayed late. "Ready?" She turned. Rothwell emerged from the boathouse carrying the diving suits, his breath forming clouds. He'd been up for hours, he'd said, preparing the equipment, checking the apparatus for leaks, calculating the depth where her crates had sunk based on the boatman's description. "Ready," she confirmed, though her stomach twisted with nerves. They'd spent the previous 3 days waiting for conditions. 3 days in which she'd worked in his library while he paced the house like a caged thing, appearing periodically to point out relevant books or offer terse observations about her thesis. He knew more about cartographic history than he'd initially let on. His grandfather's collection included medieval treatises on navigation, Islamic astronomical charts, even a fragment of what might be a Ptolemaic atlas. "You studied this," she'd accused him on the second day, looking up from a 13th century portolan chart. "I studied everything once." He'd stood at the window, silhouetted against grey light. "Before the war, I was supposed to be a scholar, second son. No responsibilities beyond showing up drunk enough to family dinners. I spent my time at Cambridge reading everything I could reach." His voice had gone flat. "Then my brother died. Typhus, ironically, killed him faster than war killed most men I knew. Suddenly I was the heir, and father decided education was wasted on inheritors. Better I learn estate management and which fork to use at diplomatic dinners." "Did you?" "Learn estate management? Barely. I was too busy drinking and trying to erase the fact that I'd been the wrong son." He turned from the window, his face unreadable. "Then the war came, and erasure seemed easier via heroism. Or death. I wasn't particular." The admission had stolen her words. She'd watched him leave the library, his limp more pronounced. It always worsened when he spoke about the past. She'd wanted to follow, to say something. But what? That she understood? She didn't. Not really. Her isolation had been chosen. His had been thrust upon him by death and duty and the world's brutal indifference to which sons survived. Now, standing beside him on the dock, she studied his profile. He'd shaved, she noticed, trimmed his hair, small signs of care emerging like spring shoots after long winter. "The crate should be 30 yards out, 40 feet down," he said, pointing. "I'll go first. If I find them, I'll surface and you'll come down to help secure the lines." At her protest, he shook his head. "I need to verify they're recoverable. No point both of us risking it if they've broken apart." "And if you get in trouble?" "Pull the rope 3 times. I'll surface." He began shrugging into the diving suit, the heavy rubberized fabric crackling in the cold air. "You know the signals?" 2 pulls, found something. 3 pulls, surface immediately. 4 pulls, danger. She recited it mechanically, her mind elsewhere. "Tobias?" He looked up at the use of his Christian name. They'd maintained formality until now, the title's a kind of armor. But armor, she'd learned, eventually became a cage. "If something goes wrong..." "It won't. But if it does, then you'll complete your manuscript anyway." He said it with such fierce certainty that she blinked. "You'll find another way. You're too bloody stubborn not to." He pulled on the helmet, his voice becoming muffled. "And for what it's worth, Miss Lockhart, Gwyneth, I believe your work matters, whether I surface or not." Then he stepped off the dock into water that swallowed him whole. Gwyneth fed the airline through her hands, counting seconds. At this depth, he had perhaps 15 minutes before the pressure became dangerous. She watched the bubbles rise, tracking his descent. The rope jerked, once, twice. He'd reached bottom. The minutes crawled. She focused on the airline's steady rhythm, the reassuring proof of breath. 10 minutes. 12. Her hands ached from cold. 15. Then, 2 sharp pulls. He'd found them. Relief flooded through her. She pulled the rope twice in response. Acknowledged. Now came the hard part, waiting while he secured the salvage lines, praying the crates hadn't disintegrated, that the maps inside might somehow have survived. 20 minutes, the maximum safe time. She pulled the rope 3 times. Surface now. Nothing. She pulled again harder. 3 sharp jerks. Still nothing. Panic clawed up her throat. She pulled 4 times. Danger! And threw off her coat, already reaching for the spare diving suit. Her hands shook so badly she could barely fasten the clasps. The helmet went on, heavy and claustrophobic. She stepped to the dock's edge. A hand broke the surface. Rothwell emerged, gasping, tearing off his helmet. Water streamed from his hair. His face was bone white. "What happened?" Gwyneth demanded, hauling off her own helmet. "Why didn't you surface?" "The rope," he coughed, clinging to the dock. "Got tangled in wreckage. I couldn't signal." Another cough. "Your books are there, 3 crates, mostly intact. But there's something else." "What?" His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. A body. The constable arrived that afternoon from Keswick, a heavy-set man named Darnley, who looked as if he'd never met a problem that couldn't be solved by ignoring it long enough. "Divers retrieved the remains," he said, standing in Rothwell's drawing room and dripping on the carpet without apology. "Male, from the clothing. Been down there perhaps a month, maybe longer. Hard to say." He pulled out a notebook. "Any reason to think it's connected to this household?" Rothwell stood at the window, his back to them both. "No. Your factor mentioned you've had difficulties. With creditors. Threats, even. Every estate in Cumberland has creditors. It's not grounds for murder." "Who said murder?" Darnley's eyes were sharp despite his stolid manner. Man could have been a poacher. Or drunk. Fell off a boat and drowned. "In diving weights." Rothwell's voice was cold. "Your divers mentioned the body had been weighted. That suggests intent." A long silence. Gwyneth watched Darnley's face carefully. She'd learned to read men's expressions from years of having her scholarship doubted. The subtle tells of dismissal, of minds already made up. "Lord Rothwell," the constable said slowly, "I'm going to ask you directly. Did you have anything to do with this man's death?" Rothwell turned. His face was expressionless. "No." "Can you account for your whereabouts over the past month?" "I've been here. Alone mostly. Sometimes walking the fells." He gestured vaguely. Not exactly verifiable. Darnley made a note. "And the lady?" "Arrived 4 days ago," Gwyneth interjected. "I can hardly vouch for Lord Rothwell's activities before we met." "But you're staying here, unchaperoned." Darnley's tone made it an accusation. "I'm renting rooms," she said sharply. "My living arrangements aren't your concern, unless you're suggesting I'm an accomplice to a murder that occurred before I arrived." The constable flushed. "I'm suggesting nothing, just gathering facts." He closed his notebook. "We'll identify the body, ask some questions. In the meantime, Lord Rothwell, I'd appreciate if you stayed local." "Where would I go?" Rothwell asked bitterly. "This house is all I have left. I'm hardly going to flee to the continent with creditors breathing down my neck." After Darnley left, they stood in silence. Rain had resumed, turning the windows into rivers of grey. "You didn't tell him everything," Gwyneth said. Rothwell's laugh was hollow. "Observant." "Who was he? The dead man?" "I don't know. Truly." He crossed to the sideboard, poured whiskey, set it down untouched, the same ritual as before. "But I have suspicions." "Tell me." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My factor, Carrick, has been pressing me to sell. Says the estate's beyond saving, that I should cut my losses before the creditors force bankruptcy. But there's someone else making offers. Anonymous letters, increasingly aggressive, threatening to expose..." He trailed off. "Expose what?" "My drinking, my debts, the fact that half this house is mortgaged." His voice went flat. "My father left the estate in ruins. He borrowed against everything, the land, the investments, even my mother's dowry, to finance his political ambitions. When he died, I inherited nothing but debt and a title heavy enough to drown under." Gwyneth's chest tightened. "You're losing Rothwell Manor." "Lost it already, in everything but name. The question is whether I sell on my terms or wait for the banks to seize it." He drained the glass in one swallow. "But someone's been pushing me toward the latter. Incidents. Small at first, fences cut, sheep gone missing. Then a fire in the tenant cottages last month. No one hurt, thank God, but the message was clear. Sell, or things get worse. Precisely. And now a body appears in my lake, weighted and hidden. He drained the glass in one swallow. Someone wants me gone, and they're not being subtle about it. Have you told the constable this, and sound paranoid? A drunken lord claiming conspiracy when the simpler explanation is that I'm guilty. He laughed bitterly. Darnley already suspects me. This just gives him motive. Gwyneth moved to stand beside him at the window. Below, the lake churned grey-green, keeping its secrets. The body. Did you recognize the clothing? Working class. Wool coat, hobnailed boots. Could be any labourer in Cumberland. He paused. But the hands were wrong. Wrong how? Soft, no calluses. Whoever he was, he didn't make his living with manual labour. Rothwell's jaw tightened. Someone dressed a gentleman to look like a worker, killed him, and sank him in my lake. The question is why? The implications settled over them like the mist outside. This wasn't random violence, it was calculated, meant to frame Rothwell, or at minimum, drive him to desperate action. Who benefits from your ruin? Gwyneth asked. Besides my creditors, take your pick. He gestured at the room, the fine furniture, the paintings, the accumulated weight of generations. This is prime land. The railway's expanding, tourism's booming. Whoever buys Rothwell Manor could triple their investment in a decade. And there are men who'd kill for less. Names. He gave her 3. Carrick, his factor, who'd profit from the sale commission. Marsden, a local industrialist who'd been buying up estates to convert into hotels. And Finch, a London businessman with mysterious connections and suspicious timing. Any of them capable of murder? I spent 2 years in a war, Rothwell said quietly. I learned that anyone's capable of murder, given the right pressure. The question isn't capability, it's willingness. Outside, the light was failing. Gwyneth thought of her maps, still at the lake bottom, tangled with a corpse. Tomorrow they'd attempt another recovery, but now the salvage operation had become something darker. Not just rescuing her research, but potentially recovering evidence. We should examine your father's papers, she said. Look for records of who he borrowed from, what debts exist. If someone's blackmailing you toward bankruptcy, there'll be documentation. The papers are in his study, unopened since he died. Rothwell's voice held something she couldn't quite name. Dread, perhaps, or shame. I couldn't face them. Then we'll face them together. He looked at her then, really looked, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. Why are you helping me? Your manuscript, your career, none of this concerns you. Doesn't it? Gwyneth met his eyes steadily. You're risking yourself to salvage my work. The least I can do is help you salvage yours. She paused. Besides, I've spent my life studying how maps lie. I'm rather good at detecting deception. Perhaps those skills translate to detecting murderers. The corner of his mouth lifted. A cartographer playing detective. We both know navigation is just applied problem-solving. Whether you're crossing deserts or navigating conspiracies, the principles are similar. Gather data, test theories, follow the evidence. And if the evidence leads somewhere we don't like, then we'll know the truth anyway. She said it firmly, believing it. Truth is always worth more than comfortable ignorance. Rothwell studied her for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. To truth, then. She took it. His palm was warm, calloused, surprisingly gentle. They shook once, formally, but neither pulled away immediately. The handshake became something else, a mutual recognition, perhaps, of two people who'd chosen difficult truths over easy lies. Tomorrow, he said, we'll finish recovering your maps, then we'll start investigating. His grip tightened. But Gwyneth, if this becomes dangerous, and I think it will, you'll leave. Go back to London, find another way. Will you leave? I can't. This is my house, my disaster. Then I'm staying too. She pulled her hand free. You don't get to make that choice for me. I could. What, throw me out? While I'm paying rent? She raised an eyebrow. Try it and I'll tell Constable Darnley exactly how inappropriate our living arrangement is. See how that helps your reputation." Despite everything, the body, the threats, the accumulated weight of disaster, Rothwell laughed. Real laughter, surprised and genuine. "You'd blackmail me. Consider it a scholarly approach to negotiation." She moved toward the door. "Now, show me your father's study. We have work to do." He followed, still chuckling softly. Behind them, the whiskey sat abandoned on the sideboard, a small victory neither mentioned, but both noticed. The truth, Gwyneth thought, was that she'd already made her choice. Not just about helping him, but about something larger that she wasn't quite ready to name. Something to do with the way he looked at her maps with a scholar's respect rather than a man's condescension. Something about how his brokenness matched hers in ways that made them both less broken when together. "Tell me about Sevastopol," she said suddenly. His expression shuttered. "Why?" "Because you carry it with you. Every limp, every moment you reach for whiskey but don't drink. Because understanding where you've been might help me understand where we're going." She paused. "And because I want to know." For a long moment she thought he'd refuse. Then, "We laid siege for a year, 11 months and 2 weeks to be precise. Long enough that the cold and disease killed more men than the Russians did." His voice went distant. "I was assigned to the engineering corps, tunnels and trenches, not glorious cavalry charges. We dug like moles while they shelled us. Friends died beside me from sniper fire so random it felt like God drawing lots." He moved to the window. Outside, full dark had fallen. "The knee happened in the last month. We were undermining their fortifications, trying to collapse the walls with explosives. Their sappers heard us. They countermined, detonated early. The tunnel collapsed. I was closest to the exit, so I survived. The 7 men behind me didn't." Gwyneth's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "I'm not." The words were harsh. "I'm grateful it was my knee and not my life. Grateful I can still walk, even if it hurts. Grateful I came home at all." He turned. "But I'm also angry. Angry that I survived when better men didn't. Angry that I returned to find my father had destroyed everything I was supposed to inherit. Angry that the war taught me to value truth and courage, then dropped me into a world where lying about debts and pretending solvency mattered more than anything I learned in the Crimea." "Is that why you drink?" "Drank, mostly." He met her eyes. "I drank, to forget. Not the war, but the after. The realization that everything I'd fought for was a fiction. Empire, honor, duty. All of it just pretty words covering ugly realities." His voice dropped. "Your maps show how geography lies. The war taught me that everything lies. Nations, families, even ourselves." "Not everything." "No?" "Some things are true." She said it with certainty. "Mathematics, physics. The fact that water seeks its level and compasses point north. The fact that you saved my books even though you gained nothing. The fact that you're still fighting even though surrender would be easier." He stared at her, something raw in his expression. "You have remarkable faith in human decency for someone who's been denied recognition her entire career." "I have faith in evidence." She moved closer. "And the evidence suggests you're a better man than you think you are." The space between them felt charged, like air before a storm. She could smell him, wool and lake water, and something uniquely him. His eyes dropped to her mouth, then away. "I should go," he said roughly. "It's late." But he didn't move. Neither did she. "Tobias, don't." His voice was pained. "Please. I'm trying to be honorable here. I'm not asking you to be dishonorable. I'm asking you to be human." She held his gaze. "We're both alone in this house, both fighting battles we didn't choose. Would it be so terrible to acknowledge that we're... what, attracted to each other?" He laughed bitterly. "Of course I'm attracted to you. You're brilliant and brave, and you look at my books like they're treasure. But you're also my tenant, and I'm a drunk, bankrupt lord under investigation for murder. Nothing about this situation recommends romance." I wasn't suggesting romance. I was suggesting honesty. She raised her chin. I find you interesting, complicated, worth knowing, and yes, attractive. But I'm not some swooning miss expecting declarations. I'm simply stating facts. Facts. Yes, I deal in evidence, remember? She smiled slightly. Consider it a hypothesis, that two people might acknowledge mutual regard without it devolving into melodrama. Despite everything, he laughed. You're extraordinary. I'm logical. There's a difference. She stepped back, breaking the tension. Now, tomorrow we dive again. Early, before Darnley returns with more questions. We'll recover my maps, then we'll begin investigating properly. Agreed? Agreed. But his eyes held something soft, something that made her pulse quicken. Gwyneth, for what it's worth, I'm glad your boat overturned. Terrible circumstances, fortuitous outcome. Likewise. She left him standing in his father's study, surrounded by evidence of failure, and climbed the stairs to her cold room in the east wing. But she didn't feel cold. Her skin burned with the memory of his nearness, with the admission neither had quite spoken, that this, whatever this was, mattered more than either wanted to acknowledge. Outside her window, the lake lay black and still. Tomorrow they'd descend into its depths again, hunting for maps and answers. But tonight, lying in the dark, Gwyneth allowed herself to admit a truth she'd been avoiding. She was beginning to care for Tobias Rothwell in ways that had nothing to do with manuscript deadlines or murder investigations. In ways that felt dangerous and inevitable as the tide. And like any good scholar, she'd need to test that hypothesis. To see where the evidence led, even if the destination wasn't marked on any map. Especially if it wasn't. They descended at dawn, when the lake was a sheet of black glass and frost turned the dock silver. This time, Gwyneth went down with him. Her father's training came back, the careful breath control, the awareness of pressure against your eardrums, the strange, muffled quality of underwater sound. They'd rigged a basket with flotation bladders, something Rothwell's grandfather had invented for recovering artifacts. Primitive but functional. The water was murky green, visibility barely 5 feet. Gwyneth followed Rothwell's guide rope down, past schools of perch that scattered like silver coins, past the thermocline where the water turned suddenly cold as winter. Then, the bottom. 40 feet down, and the pressure made her skull ache. Rothwell pointed. Through the gloom she saw her crates, 3 of them, tilted at angles where they'd settled. And beyond, half hidden by silt, the dark shape that was not a rock. The body. Even weighted and submerged, it looked wrong. Too still. Too inhuman. Death reduced everything to object. Gwyneth forced herself to look away, to focus on the crates. Together they worked in the green silence. Rothwell pried open the first crate while Gwyneth held the airline. Inside, books, swollen with water, their pages pulp. Her heart sank. 3 years of collecting destroyed. But then, a flash of vellum. Rothwell pulled out a leather case still sealed. The wax hadn't broken. She grabbed his arm, nodded frantically. Open it. His knife slipped under the seal. The case opened. Inside, dry as desert sand, lay her maps. The vellum had protected them, and the case's leather had held against water pressure. Rothwell pulled out one, a Crusader-era Mappa Mundi, showing Jerusalem at the world's center, Europe compressed impossibly small, Asia sprawling with imaginary kingdoms, perfect, intact, salvageable. Gwyneth wanted to weep with relief. They loaded the sealed cases into the basket, 5 in total, all containing maps. The books were lost, but the crucial evidence had survived. She started to ascend, then Rothwell grabbed her arm. He pointed at the body, made a gesture. Look. She shook her head. They needed to surface to get the maps secure, but he insisted, pulling her toward the corpse. Up close, details emerged. The man was young, perhaps 30. His coat was wool, but beneath she glimpsed a waistcoat of finer material. And his hands, pale as fish bellies, bore a ring on the right index finger. Gold, with an insignia. Rothwell worked it free, pocketed it, then pointed up. Now we go. They ascended slowly, carefully. Too fast and the pressure change could kill them. 15 feet. 10. 5. They broke surface, gasping. The basket bobbed behind them, heavy with saved maps. The ring, Gwyneth panted when they'd hauled themselves onto the dock. What was it? Rothwell pulled off his helmet, water streaming from his hair. He held out the ring. Gold, heavy, with an insignia carved deep. 2 serpents intertwined around a caduceus. Medical insignia, he said. Physician's symbol. The dead man was a doctor? Or wanted to appear as one? He turned the ring over. Inside the band, engraved in tiny letters, J. Finch. Gwyneth's breath caught. That's the name you mentioned. The London businessman. With mysterious connections. Rothwell's expression was grim. Apparently his connections extended to medicine, or at least to owning a doctor's ring. They hauled the basket to shore. Inside the boathouse, Gwyneth carefully removed the map cases. The vellum had survived, but needed immediate care, gentle drying, preservation. She spread them across tables, weighted corners, began the painstaking process of documentation. Rothwell watched. Will they be enough? For your manuscript? More than enough. She photographed one, an Ottoman naval chart showing the Mediterranean. These alone prove my thesis about deliberate distortion. Look, the North African coast is compressed to nothing, but Constantinople is drawn large enough to see individual buildings. Geography as imperial propaganda. Truth bent to serve power. Exactly. She looked up. Like your father's debts being consolidated by the same man who's pressuring you to sell. Or a murder victim conveniently appearing in your lake. She gestured at the maps. Everything's connected. The question is seeing the pattern. And you're good at patterns. I navigate by them. She dried her hands. Now, the ring. J. Finch, do you know him? Of him. Never met the man personally. Rothwell leaned against the work table. He approached me once through a solicitor, offered to invest in Rothwell Manor. Essentially, he'd pay off the creditors in exchange for a controlling interest in the estate. I'd keep the title, he'd own everything else. You refused? I'm not so desperate I'll surrender my ancestors' land to a stranger. His voice was bitter. Though perhaps I should be. At least then I'd be free of this entire disaster. You don't mean that. Don't I? He met her eyes. Some days I think burning it all down would be kinder than this slow suffocation. Gwyneth set down the map she'd been examining. If you burn it, they win. Whoever's behind this, Marsden, Finch, someone else entirely, they're betting you'll break, that the pressure will crush you. She moved closer. But you survived a war, survived losing your family, your health, your future. You're still standing. That's not weakness, that's steel. It feels like rust. Then we'll polish you until you shine again. She said it fiercely, starting with proving you didn't kill Finch. Assuming he's dead, the ring doesn't confirm identity. No, but it gives us a lead. She pulled on her coat. We visit the constable, tell him what we found, see if Finch has been reported missing. And if he has? Then we have a name, and names lead to connections, and connections lead to truth. She handed him the ring. Come on, we have a murder to solve. Constable Darnley studied the ring with the expression of a man who'd eaten something unpleasant and was deciding whether to complain. J. Finch, he said slowly. James Finch, I'd wager. London businessman, made his fortune in railways. Disappeared 3 weeks ago, according to the newspapers. Disappeared? Rothwell leaned forward. Not dead. Missing. Last seen in Manchester on business. Never returned to his hotel. Darnley set the ring down. His wife offered a reward for information. Significant sum. Did she report him missing here, in Cumberland? No specific location mentioned, just gone. The constable's eyes narrowed. How did you come by this ring, Lord Rothwell? From the body in my lake. Rothwell's voice was steady. We were recovering Miss Lockhart's property and found it on the corpse's hand. You removed evidence from a body. I removed a ring that might identify said body, which you'd already retrieved and presumably examined. Rothwell's tone was icy. Would you prefer the victim remain anonymous? Darnley flushed. I'd prefer you not interfere with official investigations. Then perhaps official investigations should be more thorough. Gwyneth interjected smoothly. Constable, Lord Rothwell is trying to help. If the victim is James Finch, that surely narrows your suspects considerably. Or expands them. Darnley picked up the ring again. Finch was wealthy. Wealthy men make enemies. Question is why his body ended up here specifically. Perhaps because someone wanted to implicate Lord Rothwell, Gwyneth suggested. Who benefits from his arrest? Plenty of people. The constable stood. I'll make inquiries. Send word to London, see if the description matches. In the meantime, he looked at Rothwell. Don't leave the district. And Miss Lockhart, I'd reconsider your living arrangements. A woman alone with a man under investigation isn't wise. After he left, they sat in silence. He thinks I did it, Rothwell said finally. He thinks someone did, and you're convenient. Gwyneth tapped her fingers on the table. We need to find who else had motive to kill Finch, and why frame you specifically. Where do we start? With Finch's connections. She pulled out her notebook. The habit of documentation ran deep. He disappeared in Manchester. Marsden's business is based there. That's not coincidence. You think Marsden killed him? I think Finch and Marsden were connected, and that connection somehow threatened Finch's life. She wrote rapidly. We need records, business dealings, correspondence, anything that links them. Those would be in Manchester. Then we go to Manchester. At his startled look, she shrugged. What? You thought I'd sit here embroidering while you investigated? I can read commercial registers as easily as medieval maps. Better, actually. At least business documents are written in comprehensible English. It's dangerous. If Marsden is our killer, then we're already in danger by virtue of existing. She closed the notebook. Besides, I'm not helpless. I've traveled through Egypt, Constantinople, North Africa. I've dealt with thieves, corrupt officials, men who thought a woman alone was easy prey. Her eyes were hard. I'm still here. They're not. Rothwell stared at her. Then slowly he smiled. You're terrifying. Good. I find terror a useful deterrent. She stood. Now, the afternoon train to Manchester leaves at 3. That gives us 2 hours to prepare. Pack light. We'll be gone overnight at minimum. You're serious. Deadly. She paused. Unless you'd prefer to wait here while Darnley builds his case and Marsden tightens the noose. Your choice. He rose, wincing as his knee protested. 2 hours. I'll arrange a hotel. Separate rooms. Obviously. But something in his voice suggested the specification pained him. Gwyneth pretended not to notice, because acknowledging what was growing between them, the attraction, the partnership, the sense of two people who fit together like interlocking map projections, would complicate everything. Better to focus on murder and survival. Time enough for the rest after. If they survived. The train to Manchester cut through landscape that shifted from pastoral to industrial with startling abruptness. Green fells gave way to smoking chimneys, clear streams to fouled canals. By the time they reached the city, the sun had been replaced by a pall of coal smoke that turned afternoon into premature dusk. Rothwell had wired ahead to an old Cambridge friend who worked in Manchester's commercial district. They met at a pub near the Exchange, a cramped, smoke-filled room where men shouted over ale about cotton prices and railway shares. The friend, a thin man named Garrett with ink-stained fingers, slid a folder across the table. Everything I could find on Finch and Marsden, he said quietly. And you're right, they're connected. Marsden's company handles property acquisitions. Finch provided the capital. Together they've bought up half of Cumberland over the past 5 years. Rothwell opened the folder. Inside, contracts, property deeds, loan agreements. All showing the same pattern. Estates purchased at depressed prices from desperate owners. How do they depress the prices? Gwyneth asked. Garrett glanced around, lowered his voice. Rumors, strategic ones, that the owner's a drunk or mad or planning to flee creditors. Stories that make banks nervous, buyers wary. Then Marsden swoops in with a generous offer that's actually theft. He tapped the folder. Rothwell Manor is on their list. Has been for 2 years. Since my father died, Rothwell said quietly. They've been patient, waiting for you to collapse under the debt. Garrett's expression was sympathetic. Finch handled the financial pressure, consolidating loans, buying up your creditors. Marsden would have handled the acquisition once you broke. But something went wrong, Gwyneth said. Finch ended up dead. Maybe they had a falling out? Garrett suggested. Marsden wanted to push harder, Finch wanted to wait, or vice versa. Or Finch discovered something Marsden didn't want known. Rothwell's voice was grim. Something worth killing to protect. They spent the next hour combing through documents. The pattern was clear. Finch and Marsden had systematically destroyed at least a dozen estates, then bought them for fractions of their value. The profits were staggering, hundreds of thousands of pounds. But there was something else. Buried in the contracts, a clause that appeared repeatedly. All property transfers subject to final approval by the Society. What society? Gwyneth asked. Garrett shook his head. No idea. It's referenced in every deal but never explained. Like they're answering to someone higher. A consortium of investors? Maybe. Or something else entirely. He closed the folder. Whatever it is, both Finch and Marsden deferred to it. Which means there's someone above them. Someone with more power. Rothwell and Gwyneth exchanged glances. The conspiracy was larger than they'd imagined. Not just 2 men, but an organization. And if that organization had killed Finch for stepping out of line... We need to find Marsden, Rothwell said. Confront him directly. That's suicide, Garrett protested. Maybe, but it's also the only way forward. Rothwell stood. Where is he? He keeps offices on Deansgate, but Tobias, if he's a murderer, then it's better I face him in a public office than wait for him to come to Rothwell Manor in the dark. Rothwell's voice was steel. Thank you, Garrett, for everything. They left the pub and navigated Manchester's crowded streets. The city was a maze of smoke and noise, entirely unlike the Lake District's empty spaces. Gwyneth stayed close to Rothwell, aware of eyes following them. A well-dressed couple, clearly not locals, drew attention. Marsden's offices occupied the 3rd floor of a new building, all glass and steel, a temple to industrial progress. The clerk at the desk looked them over with barely concealed disdain. Mr. Marsden doesn't see visitors without appointments. Tell him Lord Rothwell is here about James Finch. Rothwell's voice carried aristocratic authority. He'll want to speak with me. The clerk hesitated, then disappeared through an inner door, returned moments later looking shaken. Mr. Marsden will see you. 5 minutes. They entered an office that was aggressively modern, chrome and leather, architectural drawings on the walls showing planned developments, and behind a desk of polished steel sat a man who looked like he'd been assembled from sharp angles, pointed chin, blade-thin nose, eyes like chips of flint. Lord Rothwell. Marsden didn't stand. And companion. To what do I owe this unexpected visit? James Finch is dead, Rothwell said flatly. His body was found in my lake, wearing this. He tossed the ring onto the desk. Marsden's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Calculation, perhaps. Or fear. I'm sorry to hear that. James was a valued business partner. He pushed the ring back. But I'm not sure why you're bringing this to me. Because you and Finch were systematically destroying estates to buy them cheaply. Because Rothwell Manor is on your list. And because Finch's body conveniently appeared on my property just as you're pressuring me to sell. Gwyneth's voice was cold. That's a remarkable coincidence, Mr. Marsden. The industrialist's gaze shifted to her. And you are? Gwyneth Lockhart, scholar, cartographer, and presently engaged in documenting patterns of deceit. She smiled without warmth. I specialize in exposing lies masquerading as truth. Your business model, for instance, is essentially cartographic fraud, redrawing property values to suit your profit margins. Marsden's jaw tightened. That's quite an accusation. It's an analysis. Accusations require proof, which I'm currently gathering. She leaned forward. Tell me, Mr. Marsden, when did you last see James Finch? 3 weeks ago, here in Manchester. His voice was clipped. We discussed several acquisitions. He left for London. I haven't seen him since. Did you argue? We discussed strategy, sometimes vigorously. Marsden stood. But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're implying. James and I were partners. His death costs me money and time. Unless he was becoming a liability, Rothwell suggested. Unless he wanted out, or threatened to expose your methods. James knew exactly what our methods were. He designed half of them. Marsden moved to the window, looked out at Manchester's smoke-stained skyline. Look, I won't pretend we're ethical. We're businessmen. We find opportunities, exploit them. That's commerce. But murder, that's a different level of risk, and one I'm not foolish enough to take. Then who killed him? Gwyneth asked. Marsden was silent for a long moment. Then, the society. The words hung in the air. Explain, Rothwell demanded. I can't. Not here, not safely. Marsden's voice dropped. But if James is dead, it's because he crossed them. And if you're digging into this, you're next. He looked at them both. Go home. Sell the estate. Take what you can and run. Because once the society decides you're a problem, you don't survive. We're not running, Gwyneth said. Then you're fools. Marsden returned to his desk. This meeting is over. Leave. Now. Outside, the Manchester twilight had deepened to full dark. Gas lamps flickered along Deansgate, casting shadows that seemed to writhe with menace. He's terrified, Rothwell said quietly. Yes, which means the society is real and dangerous. Gwyneth's mind raced. We need to find out what Finch discovered, why they killed him. How? We have no leads. We have one. She pulled out her notebook, flipped to the notes she'd made from the documents. All the property transfers were signed by a solicitor in London, a man named Blackwood. If anyone knows the society's identity, it's him. London's a day's journey. Then we leave tomorrow. She met his eyes. Unless you want to quit. No. His voice was firm. We finish this. Together. They found a hotel, respectable if shabby, and took separate rooms as promised. But as Gwyneth lay in the narrow bed, listening to Manchester's industrial heartbeat through thin walls, she felt the weight of what they'd uncovered. A conspiracy, an organization powerful enough to kill with impunity, and they were walking directly into its heart, armed with nothing but questions and stubbornness. She thought of Rothwell in the next room, probably not sleeping either. Thought of how he'd stood in Marsden's office, shoulders squared, despite the fear she'd seen in his eyes. Thought of his hands on the diving equipment, his careful attention to her maps, the way he'd looked at her when she said she was staying. Truth is always worth more than comfortable ignorance. She'd told him that, believed it. But now, lying in the dark with the knowledge of organized murder pressing down, she wondered, what if the truth killed them? What if some maps were better left undrawn? Then she remembered her father's voice. The hardest truths are the ones most worth pursuing. Because if good people don't speak them, only villains will control the narrative. Tomorrow they'd go to London. They'd find Blackwood. They'd trace this conspiracy to its source. And either they'd expose it, or it would bury them. Gwyneth Lockhart had never walked away from difficult truths before. She wasn't about to start now. London arrived with rain, cold, grey, relentless, the sort that seeped through wool and into bones, turning November into a preview of winter's cruelty. Rothwell and Gwyneth emerged from King's Cross Station into a wall of water and noise. Vendors shouting, carriages splashing through puddles deep as rivers, the city's perpetual roar. I'd forgotten how much I hate this place, Rothwell muttered, pulling his coat tighter. Gwyneth couldn't disagree. After the Lake District's austere beauty, London felt like drowning in humanity. Too many bodies, too much smoke, the sky pressed down by pollution and greed. But somewhere in this sprawl was the solicitor Blackwood, and with him, answers. They found his offices in Holborn, a respectable district of legal firms and insurance agencies. The building was Georgian, well maintained, the brass nameplate polished. Blackwood and Sons, solicitors. Inside smelled of old paper and older money. A clerk directed them to the second floor, where Theodore Blackwood himself received them in an office lined with legal tomes and certificates of professional standing. Blackwood was perhaps 60, silver-haired, with the sort of face that had spent decades practicing neutrality. He examined Rothwell's card with raised eyebrows. "Lord Rothwell, an unexpected pleasure." His voice was cultured, careful. "How may I assist?" "I want to know about the society," Rothwell said bluntly. Blackwood's expression didn't change, but his hands, resting on the desk, tensed infinitesimally. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "The society that approves all property transfers handled by Marsden and Associates. The society that James Finch answered to. The society," Rothwell leaned forward, "that may have murdered him for stepping out of line." A long silence. Outside, rain hammered the windows. Finally, Blackwood spoke. "You should leave London." They left Blackwood staring at his desk, a man who'd traded his integrity for safety, and found it left him with neither. Outside, the rain had intensified. They stood under the building's awning, watching London drown itself. "He's useless," Rothwell said bitterly. "He's terrified. There's a difference." Gwyneth's mind worked through possibilities. But he confirmed something important. The society operates through intermediaries, which means somewhere in this city is the person who contacted Finch and Marsden, the link between them and the leadership. "How do we find that person?" "We think like cartographers." She pulled out her notebook, now damp from rain. "We map what we know. Finch, dead, in your lake. Marsden, terrified, still operating. Blackwood, legally complicit but ignorant of leadership. What's the common element?" "Fear." "Yes, but also," she tapped the notebook, "they all communicate through writing. Anonymous letters, legal documents. Nothing verbal, nothing face-to-face. The society maintains distance through paper trails, which are then burned. Legally required ones aren't." Gwyneth's eyes lit. "Property transfers need registration, public record. If we access the land registry, we can trace patterns. Who bought what, when, for how much. Find the anomalies, the purchases that don't match public records. That's thousands of documents. Then we'd better start reading." The company's registration office occupied a hulking building in Bloomsbury, its halls lined with file cabinets containing every property transaction in England. Gwyneth and Rothwell spent 8 hours wading through records, their eyes burning from gaslight and cramped handwriting. But patterns emerged. 23 estates in the north, all purchased between 1857 and 1862, all bought by different named entities. But the signatures on the transfer documents, though varied, shared subtle characteristics. The same hand, disguised but identifiable to someone trained in textual analysis. "Look." Gwyneth laid out 6 documents. "The capital R in each signature. See how it slopes slightly left. And the crossed T, always with a slight hook at the end. Same person, different names." Rothwell peered at the documents. "Can you prove that?" "In court, maybe not. But it's enough to identify a target." She checked the registrar's notes. These were all submitted by a single clerk, a man named Oswald Thorne. "Works here, in this building." "Then we find him." They inquired discreetly. Thorne, they learned, had worked at the registry for 15 years. Reliable, if eccentric. Kept to himself. Left promptly at 5 every evening. It was 4:30 now. They waited outside, watching the building's exit. At 5:05, a thin man with thinning hair and a nervous manner emerged, clutching a leather satchel. He hurried through the rain toward the omnibus stop. Rothwell and Gwyneth followed. The omnibus carried them east, toward Whitechapel and the city's poorer districts. Thorne got off near a row of shabby boarding houses, ducked into one. They waited 5 minutes, then followed. The boarding house smelled of boiled cabbage and desperation. The landlady, bribed with a shilling, directed them to the third-floor back room. Rothwell knocked. "Mr. Thorne, we need to speak with you." Silence. Then footsteps, hurried. The sound of a window opening. "He's running!" Gwyneth bolted down the hall, toward the back stairs. Sure enough, Thorne was descending the fire escape, his satchel clutched to his chest. Rothwell's bad knee couldn't handle the descent quickly, but Gwyneth had no such limitation. She took the stairs 2 at a time, emerged in the alley just as Thorne hit the ground. He ran, but she was faster. Years of climbing archaeological sites in Egypt had left her sure-footed and quick. She caught him at the alley's end, grabbing his coat. "Stop! We just want to talk." Thorne spun, wild-eyed. "I don't know anything. Leave me alone." "You've been falsifying documents for the society." She kept her voice low, urgent. "We know you submit the property transfers. We don't care about prosecuting you. We care about stopping them." "You can't stop them. No one can." He tried to pull away. "They're everywhere. They own things. People. If I talk, I'm dead." Rothwell arrived, breathing hard. "Then you're dead anyway. Because we're not the only ones who'll figure out what you've been doing. Eventually, Marsden or someone else will realize you're a liability." He paused. "Help us, and maybe we can protect you." "How?" Thorne's laugh was hysterical. "You're a bankrupt lord and a woman with books. What protection can you offer?" "The truth." Gwyneth met his eyes. "If we expose the society publicly, they lose their power. Sunlight's the best disinfectant. But we need evidence, names, something concrete." Thorne wavered. Rain soaked them all, turning the alley into a scene of particular misery. Finally, "I have copies. Of everything. Hidden." He swallowed. "I knew someday they'd try to silence me, so I kept records. Insurance." "Where?" "Safe deposit. Lloyd's Bank, Threadneedle Street. Under a false name. Jameson." He pulled a key from his coat. "Box number 47. Everything's there. Signatures, property lists, payment records." Rothwell took the key. "Come with us. We'll get the documents, take them to the newspapers." "I can't." Thorne backed away. "They're watching. If they see me with you..." He shook his head. "Take the documents, publish them, burn the whole damn society down. But I'm done. I'm leaving London tonight." "Wait." Gwyneth reached for him. But he was already running, disappearing into the warren of Whitechapel's streets. They stood holding a key that might contain the evidence they needed, or might be a trap. "Tomorrow," Rothwell said quietly. "We get the documents first thing. Then we decide what to do." They found a hotel, nicer this time, near the bank. Separate rooms but connected by an inner door that neither locked. Some things, Gwyneth reflected, didn't require acknowledgement to be real. She couldn't sleep. Her mind churned through possibilities, dangers, the weight of what they were attempting. Somewhere in this city, the society was operating, and now they knew someone was investigating. A knock on the connecting door, soft, tentative. She opened it. Rothwell stood silhouetted against his room's lamplight, still fully dressed. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Keep thinking about Thorne, how terrified he was." Rothwell's voice was rough. "We're asking people to risk everything. For what? A manor I'm going to lose anyway? Justice that probably won't come." "For truth," Gwyneth said quietly. "Because if we don't fight, who will?" She stepped back, inviting him in. "And because some things are worth risking everything for." He entered, and they stood in her small room, the rain still hammering outside. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. The late hour, the shared danger, the fact that they were utterly alone in a city that wanted them dead. "Gwyneth," he stopped, searching for words. "When this is over, if we survive, I want..." Again he faltered. "What do you want?" "Time. With you. Not running, not investigating, just... time." He looked at her with raw honesty. I've spent 2 years not wanting anything, not feeling anything. Then you arrived in your wrecked boat with your impossible books, and suddenly I remember what it is to care, to want something beyond oblivion. Her throat tightened. I want that too. You could have that, if you left, went back to the Lake District, finished your manuscript, published your research. You don't need to be here, risking yourself for my problems. They stopped being just your problems when Finch's body appeared. She moved closer. And I'm not here out of obligation. I'm here because... She trailed off, unsure how to articulate it. Because? Because you see me, not as a curiosity or an aberration, but as a person whose work matters. Because you read my maps and understand what I'm trying to prove. Because you're the first man who's ever treated my scholarship with respect instead of condescension. She met his eyes. And because I care about you in ways I didn't expect, and probably shouldn't pursue but seem unable to stop. The silence stretched. Outside, London's heartbeat continued. Distant voices, carriage wheels, the eternal rain. Then Rothwell closed the distance between them, and when he kissed her, it felt like the most inevitable thing in the world. Like two map projections finally aligning, showing the true shape of something that had always existed, but required proper coordinates to see. She kissed him back, her hands finding his shoulders, his hair. He tasted of rain and risk, and something uniquely himself. The kiss deepened, and for a moment the society, the murder, the danger, all of it receded. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. We should stop, he said, without conviction. Probably. Neither moved. Gwyneth, if tomorrow goes badly, if the society comes after us, I need you to know. Don't. She pressed a finger to his lips. Don't make speeches about death. We're going to survive. We're going to expose them. And then we're going to have all the time in the world for this. You're very certain. I'm a scholar. I deal in evidence and logic. She smiled. And the evidence suggests we're too stubborn to die easily. He laughed, soft and surprised. Then kissed her again, gentler this time. A promise instead of passion. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, she agreed. He returned to his room, leaving the connecting door open. Gwyneth lay in her bed and listened to him moving about, the familiar sounds of another person existing in nearby space. It should have been strange. Instead, it felt right. They were mapping unknown territory together, not just the society's conspiracy, but something between them that had no name yet. Something that felt dangerous and precious and worth protecting. Tomorrow they'd face the bank, the documents, possibly the society itself. But tonight, in a cheap London hotel with rain washing the city clean, Gwyneth Lockhart allowed herself to believe they might actually survive this, and that survival might lead somewhere beautiful. Lloyd's Bank opened at 9. Rothwell and Gwyneth arrived at 8:30, watching from a coffee house across the street. Every instinct screamed trap. Thorne had been too frightened, the key too easily surrendered. But what choice did they have? At 9 precisely, they entered. The bank's interior was all marble and mahogany, designed to project stability and trust. Rothwell presented the key to a clerk. Box 47, name Jameson. The clerk consulted records, nodded. This way. They descended into the vault, a cathedral of metal boxes, each containing someone's secrets. The clerk unlocked box 47, withdrew a leather portfolio, handed it over without interest. Inside the portfolio, 24 documents. Property transfers, yes, but also something else. Photographs. Gwyneth spread them across the vault's examination table. Her breath caught. The photographs showed men, prominent men from their dress and bearing, taken at what appeared to be a private club or society meeting. And in the background of each, barely visible, a symbol. 2 serpents intertwined around a staff. The same symbol from Finch's ring. This is the society, she breathed. These men. Rothwell examined the faces. His expression went pale. That's Lord Brampton, Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. And that's Hargreaves, Member of Parliament. And Christ! He tapped another photo. That's the Lord Chancellor's secretary. The scope of it hit them simultaneously. This wasn't just a criminal conspiracy. It was corruption at the highest levels of government, judiciary, law enforcement. The society didn't just influence power, they were power. We can't fight this, Rothwell said quietly. They'll crush us. Then we make it public before they can. Gwyneth gathered the documents. The newspapers. If we publish these photographs with evidence of the property fraud, even the society can't suppress it. You're assuming newspapers will print it. What if they're compromised too? Then we try multiple newspapers, send copies to everyone simultaneously, make it too widespread to silence. Her mind raced. And we send copies to Parliament, to magistrates outside London, flood the system with information. It was desperate, dangerous, likely to fail. But it was also their only option. They spent the day making copies, found a photographer willing to duplicate the images for enough money, hired street children to deliver sealed packages to every major newspaper in London, sent telegrams to colleagues Rothwell knew in Edinburgh, Manchester, Oxford, anyone who might provide safe harbour if they needed to run. By nightfall, the evidence was distributed, dozens of copies in dozens of hands. All they could do was wait. They returned to their hotel. Gwyneth's hands shook from exhaustion and adrenaline. Rothwell poured whiskey, actually drank it this time, a small defeat in service of larger survival. How long before they come for us? She asked. If they know we have the documents, already on their way. He handed her a glass. If we're lucky, the newspapers will publish tomorrow and public outcry will provide protection. If we're unlucky, we'll face it together. He smiled grimly. I was trying not to say that. Sounds too much like a suicide pact. Or a partnership. She raised her glass. To facing impossible odds with a partner who makes them slightly less impossible. They drank. Outside, London's night noises continued, indifferent to their small drama, to the documents that might topple an empire of corruption. The knock came at midnight. Gwyneth jerked awake, had dozed in a chair, to see Rothwell already at the door, his face grim. Who is it? He called. Message for Lord Rothwell, urgent. He opened the door a crack, took the envelope. The messenger vanished before either could get a good look. Inside, a single photograph. Thorne, the registry clerk, lying in an alley, very clearly dead. And beneath it, a note in precise handwriting. You have until dawn to return all documents and leave London. Otherwise, Miss Lockhart will be found similarly. The Society. Gwyneth's blood went cold. Rothwell crumpled the note. You're leaving, now, tonight. No. This isn't negotiable. They've killed Thorne to send a message. You're next. So I should run while you stay and become their target instead? She stood. Absolutely not. Gwyneth. No. Her voice was steel. We distributed the evidence. It's done. Running now doesn't change that. And splitting up just makes us easier targets. She moved to him, gripped his arms. We stay together. We wait for the newspapers. We survive this. You should have let me face this alone. Too late. I'm already implicated, already a target. She smiled without humor. Besides, you need me. I'm the only one who can properly explain the cartographic fraud. You'd fumble the technical details. Despite everything, he huffed a laugh. Even now you're worried about accuracy. Especially now. If we're going to bring down a conspiracy, we might as well do it properly. They barricaded the door, moved furniture to create obstacles. Rothwell had a pistol. From the war, he said. Checked it with practiced efficiency. Gwyneth had her wits and a letter opener that probably wouldn't help, but made her feel slightly less helpless. Then they waited. The hours crawled. 3 o'clock. 4. 5. Dawn approaching. At 6, shouts from the street. Gwyneth ran to the window, saw newsboys with stacks of papers, headlines screaming even from this distance. Corruption in highest offices, Society of Thieves exposed. Government officials implicated in fraud. They published, she breathed. All of them. It's everywhere. Rothwell joined her, reading over her shoulder. Every major newspaper had run variations of the story. The photographs were reproduced, the documents detailed, names named, crimes alleged. Public scandal erupting before the society could suppress it. "We did it," he said, disbelieving. "We did it," she confirmed. A pounding on the door. They froze. "Lord Rothwell! Miss Lockhart! Metropolitan Police, open up!" They exchanged glances. Trap or rescue? Only one way to find out. Rothwell opened the door to find Constable Darnley, looking sleep-deprived and furious. "You two," he growled, "have created the biggest scandal in 50 years. Half of Scotland Yard is under investigation. The Lord Chancellor's secretary is in custody, and I've been ordered to bring you in for questioning about murder, conspiracy, and creating a public bloody nuisance." "So we're under arrest?" Gwyneth asked. "Protective custody." Darnley's expression softened fractionally. "The society's been dismantled, leadership scattered, warrants issued. But that doesn't mean you're safe. There are people who'd pay a lot to silence you before trials begin." He gestured. "You'll stay in secure location until we sort this disaster. Consider it the government's thanks for exposing corruption we should have caught ourselves." They spent the next 3 weeks in a manor house outside London, under guard and waiting while the scandal unfurled. Arrests cascaded through government. The Lord Chancellor resigned. Parliament launched inquiries. Every newspaper in England feasted on the story. Corrupt society exposed by scholar and war veteran became the narrative, with Gwyneth and Rothwell cast as unlikely heroes. The truth was messier. Thorne was still dead. Finch was still murdered. And while the society's leadership faced prosecution, many members simply vanished, fled to the continent, or retreated to estates where influence still protected them. Justice was incomplete, but it was something. When they finally returned to the Lake District, winter had arrived properly. Snow covered the fells, and Rothwell Manor looked like something from a fairy story, beautiful and impossible in equal measure. "Will you stay?" Rothwell asked as they stood on the terrace, looking out at frozen Derwent water. "I have a manuscript to finish," Gwyneth said. "Seems I have rather a lot of material now. Maps and manipulation, how power shapes geography. I'm adding a chapter on metaphorical cartography, how criminal conspiracies map social terrain." "So that's a yes?" "That's a where else would I go?" She turned to him. "You saved my research. I helped save your estate. Seems we make a good team." "A team," he smiled. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Unless you have a better term." "I was thinking partnership." He took her hand. "The permanent kind, if you're interested." Gwyneth's heart stuttered. "Are you proposing?" Clumsily, yes. He pulled out a ring, simple gold, no gems. "I'm a bankrupt lord with a ruined estate and a war injury. I have nothing to offer except books, bad weather, and complicated baggage. But I love you, and I hope, you might love me. So yes, I'm proposing." "You forgot something." "What?" "You respect my work. You see me as an equal. And you make excellent coffee." She took the ring, slid it on. "Yes, obviously yes." He kissed her there on the frozen terrace, and Gwyneth thought, this is what truth looks like. Not comfortable, not easy, but real. A partnership built on respect and shared danger, and the stubborn belief that some things were worth fighting for. They'd mapped unknown territory together, found each other in the wreckage, and now, standing in the winter light with snow turning the world clean, they could finally begin charting their future. The Lake District in July was a different world entirely. Green instead of gray, warm instead of frozen, the landscape gentle where winter had been harsh. Rothwell Manor, properly repaired now, the debts cleared through judicious sales and a surprisingly generous advance on Gwyneth's manuscript, glowed in afternoon sun. In the library, Gwyneth spread her finished book across the desk. 200 pages of scholarship, photographs of medieval maps, detailed analysis of how geography served power. and a final chapter on metaphorical cartography that had academic circles buzzing. The publisher had required only minor changes. The reading public, as it turned out, had considerable appetite for theoretical geography from a female author, especially one who'd helped expose governmental corruption. Rothwell entered carrying tea, his limp now barely noticeable. Months of good food, better sleep, and actual happiness had erased years of damage. He looked, Gwyneth thought, like the scholar he'd wanted to be instead of the wreck war had made him. "Your publisher sent a telegram," he said, handing it over. "First printing sold out. They're ordering a second run." Gwyneth read the message, stunned. "That's unprecedented." "You're unprecedented." He kissed the top of her head. "A cartographer who solves murders and brings down conspiracies. The public loves you." "They love the story. I'm just the scholar who provided evidence." "You're brilliant and modest. It's an infuriating combination." He pulled her up from the desk. "Come on, we're taking the afternoon off." "I have footnotes to verify." "The footnotes can wait. The lake can't." They walked down to the water. Their water now, she supposed, though she still struggled with thinking of Rothwell Manor as home. But it was starting to feel that way. The library where she worked, the terrace where they had breakfast, the bedroom they shared, with windows overlooking the fells. Home had been a theoretical concept for most of her life. Now it was coordinates. This house, this man, this impossible landscape that had nearly swallowed her, but instead taught her to swim. They'd salvaged something together. Not just maps or estates, but themselves. "I got a letter from Darnley," Rothwell said as they stood at the dock where everything had begun. "The trials are wrapping up. Most society members have been convicted. Marsden got 15 years. Blackwood turned evidence and got off with a fine and disbarment. And the others? Gone. Vanished to places where extradition doesn't reach." His voice was philosophical. "Justice is incomplete, but it's more than we had." Gwyneth thought of Thorne, killed for trying to help. Of Finch, whose body had started this entire chain. Of how close they'd come to joining them. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "The investigation, the danger?" "No." He said it without hesitation. "I was half dead before you arrived, going through motions, waiting to drink myself into actual death. You gave me purpose, a reason to fight." He took her hand. "I regret nothing except that it nearly cost your life. We protected each other." "We did." He pulled her close. "And we'll keep protecting each other, whatever comes next." "Whatever comes next," she agreed. They stood watching the lake shimmer in July sun, this body of water that had tried to steal her research and instead delivered her to exactly where she belonged. Gwyneth Lockhart had come to the Lake District to save her manuscript. She'd found murder, conspiracy, and a man who treated her scholarship with the respect it deserved. She'd mapped unknown territory, both geographic and emotional. Traced connections between power and truth, between vulnerability and strength. And she'd learned that sometimes the best discoveries weren't planned. They were shipwrecked onto your shore, demanding to be salvaged. She looked up at Rothwell, her husband now, partner always, and smiled. "Want to go diving?" she asked. "Looking for more drowned treasure?" "Just looking." She squeezed his hand. "Sometimes it's nice to explore without needing to find anything." They descended into the cold green water together, holding hands until the current separated them, then finding each other again in the deep. Surfacing and descending, mapping the lake bed just for the joy of discovery. Above them, Rothwell Manor stood against the fells, solid and real. A place they'd fought for and won. A home built not on inheritance but choice. Below them, the lake kept its secrets, some recovered, some still waiting to be found. And between the heights and depths, two shipwrecked souls had found each other and learned that salvage was just another word for salvation. The compass, Gwyneth thought, always points true north. Sometimes you just have to trust it.